Okay, hey, you're listening to the Royal Rant, where we talk about the LA Kings and also other stuff sometimes. And we have a special treat for everybody today because we have legendary hockey writer, broadcaster, podcaster, even a true crime novelist, if you can believe that, a Renaissance man of our time, Mr. Scott Burnside. Um, I
All
I
right.
think, well, I remember listening to the Hockey Today podcast, which seemed like a long time ago, religiously, that you did with Pierre LeBrun. Uh, People that are maybe new to you, I suppose, they would have seen you last year covering the first round series in the playoffs between the Oilers and Kings, or I should say the dreaded Oilers, or no, I guess I should keep it professional, but they bounced us 3 years in a row. We're getting kind of sick of these guys. But yeah, thanks so much for taking time out to talk some puck with us today. It's great.
God, that's the nicest introduction I've had in a long time. Do you mind? I'm gonna take this opening and I'm just gonna keep playing it over and over wherever I
Please feel
go.
free to
So
do so,
Yeah.
royalty free. You
yeah,
can,
well, I'll leave it. I'm happy to give you all the credit that you deserve it. Thank you for the kind words. I never get tired of talking about hockey, and it's certainly fun to talk about the Kings. It's been sort of an inch. I have, have this relationship with the Kings, and it's been kind of fun. And I've been the playoffs, as you alluded to, that was over in the blink of an eye. So I'm glad that, I'm getting a little more runway this year. Dropping in periodically with the Kings. I'll be in LA, a week and a half or so for a few days and working some more stuff. I was in Quebec with them during training camp and in Buffalo for the season opener. So because you're sort of connected to them, I've watched very closely. And as you know, I'm on the East. That's hard. It's hard for some of us Easterners to stay up late. But I've been following along very closely. It's been an interesting, first month of the season for the Kings. So I'm glad you had me aboard, and I'm happy to talk Kings and hockey anytime.
well, I mean, now that you mentioned, got right into the Kings. What are we to make of these guys up to this point? Because the season's in its infancy. They played 13 games. They're at first place in the Pacific. How much? I don't know. Are they going to be in first place in April, you think, or?
I'm not sure I have that big a crystal ball, but you know what, and again, having spent some time with them in training camp, and you understand, you know, I think there were 8 new players in the opening night lineup against Buffalo that weren't in the lineup in Game 5. That finished up the season in Edmonton. So, and that's an enormous turnover when you think of 8 new faces in your lineup. And of course, you don't have Drew Doughty, and you're not likely to, whenever it is that Drew gets back, it's going to be, let's call it half a season or whatever it's going to be by the time he gets back. So I think it was fair to wonder, how do you make all those parts come together? How quickly can you, achieve something that approaches cohesiveness? And listen, there's been lots of different elements to it. There are a couple of games early on. I watched that 8-7 game against Ottawa, and you're like, holy cow, that's is that an outlier defensively and all those kinds of things? And there were a couple of, that didn't look good against Toronto and those sorts of things. But I guess what's been impressive to me is that Jim Hiller and his staff have, they have moved things around. They have made changes. Players have come out of the lineup. I think of, players who haven't maybe played very well, so they come out of the lineup. You've had, Kevin Fiala's had issues. He's been on the bench and then he was out of the lineup. Quentin Byfield, is he going to be a center? Yes, but maybe not where we thought he was going to be a center. All those kinds of things. But to me, there has been a very methodical approach to, okay, we need to address that. Let's address it. And then you move on. And for me, what's so impressive when you play so many road games, I'm just looking here to see if my math is correct. The Kings they played 10 road games out of 14. So, you're 25% of the way through your road schedule, right? Of the 41. Now you've played 10. Um, and you're, as you pointed out, you're tied for first place in the Pacific. Geez, that's pretty good. And the other thing that it has been so impressive to me is the productivity, the depth of the offense. Right now, the Kings are tied for third in the NHL in 5-on-5 scoring. I'm not sure, at the start of the season, if you said, I think this team can score regularly, and it will be so balanced up and down the lineup. I'm not sure you would have assumed that could happen. So,
No.
I think
Mhm.
those are there's some positive things. Brant Clark, I'm fascinated to see what happens, right? There's a guy who's had a lot of the expectations been very high. I talked to his junior coach not long ago, and we talked about the innate ability there, the raw talent, and his words, not mine, it's like literally off the charts. But that sometimes, you have to corral that. You have to school it and you have to nurture it. And I think the Kings have done a nice job of that. And boy, I think he's been so good early on. And gets a chance to, again, Joel Edmondson. I think there were a lot of people wondered about the addition in the offseason, dollar term. Um, Boy, he has been really good. And I think he's been important for Brant Clark early on. And Brant Clark, and these talented young players, so much of it is about confidence. And my sense of it is there's a young man who really is starting to get it. And what a great thing for the Kings and Kings fans if that's something that he just continues to build on. That's a
Yeah,
long answer. You asked me, I just got wound up.
no, I think
That's
it's
a good
great.
answer.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you is what you thought Clark's ceiling was going to be. I don't know if it's too early to know or
I I don't know. Like, and I don't know. I just don't know. You know what? I mean, the part of the issue for a player like that is you want them you want them to play the right minutes, you want them to play with the right people, you want them to learn the whole game, and you don't want them to. And I think this is what happens with junior players. And I think, again, this is probably why it's been so important for his own evolution to play some with Ontario, have some time in the AHL. Young players who have come with a high pedigree don't, if you ask them, "Oh, do you think it would be good for you to develop in the American Hockey League for a little while?" Who says, yes, I would prefer to play there and ride around on buses? No one says that. So um, I do think it's about organizationally, have you conveyed the message? Have you explained what needs to happen, whether you're Brant Clark or anyone else, to be in the lineup every night and to be successful? I don't think there's any question about his skill set. And I think I've been so impressed by what I've seen, in the first, 14 games, whatever it's been, because it is impressive. And to answer your question, I don't know where that, top end is. And how much fun is it to watch a young player? Like I've had people compare him to Dougie Hamilton, and the boy, there's a lot of things to that can go right,
yeah, it's an
for Brant
exciting
Clark.
thing to think about, because
Yeah.
he's doing like a point a game, and you think, well, I mean, when was the last time a Kings defenseman was doing that? And it's going back to like probably like Rob Blake days.
Yeah.
So, that would be incredible. Tim, you had some questions for Scott?
Yeah, we got some news today that Arthur Kaliyev was skating in a red jersey by himself, and I just wonder, what do you think? Do you think he still has a place in the team now? Thomas is playing so well. Turcotte's out, but he was playing so well. He's day to day. Do you think he's gonna get his shot? Maybe a little mystery to Kings fans sometimes, considering last year, he put up for the games he played, he put up some good goals, numbers wise. So it's a kind of a mystery with him, what's gonna happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good question, and I'm not sure. I don't know what the plan is, and it's so unfortunate when somebody who looks like they, might be getting the opportunity, that you sort of allude to in training camp, and you're sort of thinking, well, what does the opening night roster look like for Kaliev? Is where is he in the mix?
Hmm.
And like a guy like Andre Lee, who really impressed. And, Jim Hiller was so candid about it during training camp, didn't really expect he would necessarily be where he was at the end of camp. And of course, played a lot early on in the season. If Kaliev stays healthy, has a really good camp, does that change any of that? I mean, it's kind of a mug's game. But to your question, I think like never say never, especially with a young player, because you just don't know. You don't know when the opportunities, and invariably they come because of injury, or if the team does go a bit sideways and he's back being healthy, does that does that open a door for him down the road? I mean, I guess if you're a fan, you don't want that to happen, and you don't want injuries, but those are a fact of life. And the teams that always have the greatest success in my mind, and you go back to teams that win Stanley Cups. I mean, you go back as far as 12 and 14 for the Kings, but every team that wins the Stanley Cup or goes to a cup final is blessed with incredible depth. And I guess if you're an organization, that's what you hope Kaliev gets back, he gets healthy. It is at that moment, is there an opportunity for him to play with the big club? If not, then what's the plan? But the more depth you have, the better chances you have of success, not just in the regular season, but once you get to the playoffs, you just never know when your opportunity is gonna be there. And my guess is that's what the organization is thinking about with Kaliev. Hey, someday we're gonna have to call on you. Let's hope you're ready. And if you are, then and if you make difficult decisions for coaches and managers, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny because it feels like Kaliev has been around forever, but I think he's
Yeah.
still only like 22 or maybe 23 now.
Hmm.
So yeah, you know, he could still he could still break out possibly, or that's what we're hoping. He still has that great shot, but yeah,
Yes,
and
I was just looking up. Yeah, he's 23 years old, and you're right. I mean,
Hmm.
he's 33rd overall pick in 2019, and so yeah, it does feel like the moment has been, okay, when is that moment going to be? He's played 188 NHL games. I mean, that's a bit shocking to me.
mhm.
But so yeah, and I guess again to your point, that's he's still young enough that you know who knows when that opportunity comes, right? But he's also not a kid anymore, especially as we think of kids are really kids now in the NHL, right? You're
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
18,
Hmm.
19, 20, 21.
Yeah.
He's a little bit on the other side of that. But that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, hope there's been some maturity that's come with all that he's had to face.
Right. Or at the
Hmm.
very least, I mean, if he's not getting minutes, if he could just come back and show a little something that could maybe be enticing, as maybe like a trade candidate or something.
Yeah.
But, as of right now, he does, I don't think he has much trade value. I mean, maybe, but I think his luster's kind of worn off, a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, if the future isn't with the Kings for a guy like Kaliev, then certainly for, the many teams who, are still trying to find their way and still need to, you know, flush out four NHL lines and, are looking for players who have some upside. And again, he's shown at times he does have, he's got good skills. There's an obvious upside there. So I think that's a good point as well as you get closer to the trade deadline. And again, so many other factors, where are you at injury wise, all those kinds of things, his own health, obviously. But yeah, maybe he becomes an asset you turn into something that pays immediate dividends for the Kings, and maybe it pays long-term dividends for Kaliev and another team down the road.
Well, as long as he doesn't end up in San Jose scoring 40 goals a
Yeah.
year, we could
Oh
do
yeah,
without that.
that's the Murphy's law of all those things. Of course,
Exactly.
got to trade him in the Pacific, and then he does score 40. So
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember when they traded Martin Jones to Boston, and he was a Bruin for about 2 days, and then he
Yeah.
that's right.
got flipped back to the Sharks. And I thought that tracks.
Yeah.
This is a very Kings trade right here.
That's right. I remember Martin Jones from the 16 Stanley Cup final. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
Mhm.
he had a really good career.
He did, yeah.
Well, let's see. I have a question. I mean, do you think Anze Kopitar is underrated? Because we kind of talk, since you're part of the East Coast elite that doesn't watch Pacific games, we always blame you guys. But
they tape them, right? So you don't have to
you can
watch them.
see him on demand. Yeah, you don't have to watch him live anymore.
Um, yeah, I I don't think so.
You
I
think
don't think so.
he gets his due in the league?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. And I think, but I'll tell you what's interesting when and having again, not only am I part of the East Coast elite, but I've been around a while. So, I covered the Kings playoff runs in 12 and 14. I also was in the West, if I'm not mistaken, in 13 for some of that, and
Hmm.
spent a fair amount of time around the Kings during those incredible springs. And like that's Kings fans obviously don't need to be reminded that was some time ago. Um, and yet when I see him, and I know, as a captain and you change inevitably over time, but I see the same kind of person and personality. Like to me, he has always been, and I think if you talk to teammates, I did a piece on the leadership last spring and talked to some of his former teammates. He came into the league like fully formed veteran man, right? He came in as a teenager, but he was already a guy who really got it. And
Hmm.
I don't know that he's all that much different. And the way he plays the game, his intelligence for situations and understanding what to do, and the respect that his teammates have for him, and the respect that other players around the league have for him is enormous. So I don't know that it's underrated. Like to me, he is like first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't know that there's any debate about that. And
Hmm.
I've last spring after Game 5 seemed very candid about at the end of this contract that's probably going to be enough for him. And
Yeah.
things change. You have a nice playoff run this year. Maybe your view changes or whatever, but his impact on that franchise is a forever thing, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's funny you should mention that, and maybe it's because it's been it's been a long time since there's been a long playoff run, and I covered Anjay in the Olympics in Sochi in 14, and I remember I think Slovenia won their first ever Olympic game during that tournament. And like, he's just, he's always been an elite player and a leader. So I don't think of him in any other way. So well,
Yeah.
let me ask you, when you ask that question, do you think, is it because, why do you wonder if he is well enough
Well, I
regarded?
feel like maybe in terms of the media, maybe other fan bases, or I just think about a few times where I thought he kind of got robbed of a few Selkie trophies along the way, and
Yeah.
just more on that level. Or when you see someone will put out like a top 50 players and he won't be on there,
Yeah.
just things like that. And that's
Mhm.
why I wondered what your take was,
Yeah.
because I think out here people are always like, well, people don't watch Kopitar because of the time difference and this and that, but
Yeah.
that's probably not, accurate, but you're right. And I was going to ask you if you thought he was automatic Hall of Famers, and you beat me to it. But yeah, the impact on the franchise, I mean, that'll be something that you'll measure probably when he's gone and realize, like, I mean, we're already measuring it now, but when he's gone, it'll really be like, wow, what it'll be a huge void.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like and it's easy to do, and I understand why, and I am guilty of it as well, right? You sort of lump Drew Doughty and Anjay Kopitar together, and yet they are fundamentally different human beings and obviously play different positions. And they are, in some ways, I don't know whether it's yin and yang, but to me, they were the perfect storm for that team and their evolution and their ascension to the top of the hockey mountain. it doesn't happen one without the other in my mind. And Drew Doughty, he may play till he's 45. Like who knows, right? He could be like Chris Chelios.
That would be
But
great.
whenever he's done, he likewise is a first ballot Hall of Famer. And maybe it's easier to say that, given, his personal accolades and the gold medals and all, his personal successes. Anjay's are noteworthy as well. So to me, they're both of them, whenever they're done, you know, book the weekend in Toronto for the Hall of Fame. And as in it, to me, it's a no-brainer. I don't see how it couldn't go any other way.
Yeah. No, I like how you mentioned the yin and yang because that's a very good, I think that describes that duo perfectly, right? Because you think about Dowdy, you think of just a guy who's constantly just ready to skate through a wall and he's always yapping and it seems, at least looking from the outside that Kopitar, isn't as vocal necessarily, but kind of leads by example and
Yeah.
Definitely.
whether it's training or, just leads by example that way. So they kind of complement each other so well in that regard.
Yeah. No, and I think, yeah, no, I think those personalities have been so important, just on a whole bunch of different levels. And you're absolutely right. And I think, I think that Kopitar is considered among the game's great leaders and certainly, one of the great captains. And yeah, and I just think he's revered. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And he's revered in that locker room, and he is revered around the league. And I think that, when you talk about people who have to line up against him, and whether it's you know McDavid or Crosby or any of the game's top centers. It's funny. So now, but one of the interesting parts about this team, and I was thinking about this knowing I was going to chat with you, and it's interesting that Jim Hiller has used Anjay a little bit different this year. He doesn't rely on him in terms of the penalty kill exclusively in the way that he was doing it. And even last year, he and Phil Deneau, he sort of spread it out a little bit more. And, I know that, I think for the most part, penalty kill's been pretty good. And a couple nights that maybe it wasn't, but
Hmm.
I just think it's interesting that the way Jim Hiller is approaching it. And if you have people who can share, take some of that burden off Anjay Kopitar, I mean, maybe that's the reason that I saw somewhere. I think he's on what, an 88 or 90 point pace. So that's a pretty
Yeah.
good trade-off.
No,
So
exactly. No, I mean that might bear fruit towards the end of the year and into the playoffs if he just has, if he ends up skating fewer minutes and has a little more in the tank to make it. So yeah, that I would
Yeah, that was
keep doing
fun.
that, if you can get away
Mhm.
with it, do it. Tim, you
yeah.
have another question?
Yeah, so I was going to ask about, Fiala had two really good games against his former teams, Pred and Wild. Lee started out on the first line last game, and Fiala finished on there. Now I know they've tried to get Fiala going with Kopitar and Kempe the last few seasons. Do you think that could be something that will actually that will stick or keep going or?
Yeah. Are there more teams that Kevin's played for that the Kings can play against? That would be pretty interesting. Or can they just rotate? You can get more Wild and Preds activity. So
That would
I
be
don't know.
great.
It is what's again, I think it's probably, if you're a glass half full kind of person, there have been moments where Fiala has looked like you want him to look, and he looks like he's maybe finding some of that comfort zone. Um, and the fact that the team has had success and that there has been, Warren Fogle, Alex Laferriere, there are a lot of players in that lineup who have been able to contribute early that, you know, I sometimes get the sense that Kevin Fiala tries to do too much, and that there is
Yeah.
he feels a burden because he is immensely talented. In terms
Yeah.
of raw talent, we talked about Brant Clark, who I don't know what his top end is, and he is still just a boy. But Kevin Fiala there's so much there, and
Definitely.
and the expectations are they're incredibly high for him, as they should be. So I do, my sense, and this, on a 1,000 foot view, I'm not there every night. I do watch. Uh, I get the sense sometimes that I feel he's trying to do too much, and maybe the fact that the team, if you're 4-10, like Nashville,
Mhm.
like the pressure in Nashville right now is incredible on Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, and the pressure to produce when you start poorly is enormous. Maybe this start allows Kevin Fiala to find, and if it's with Kempe and Kopitar, I'm sure everyone would be happy with that. Whatever
I
it is, so and again, I spent some time with Jim Hiller during training camp. I have a lot of time for Jim, and I think he's an interesting guy, and I think I've been curious about how will he coach this team through this stretch, without Drew and all those kinds of things. Um, he would love to find, I'm sure, a place where he could put Kevin Fiala every single night, but
yeah.
he's also got the luxury where he's got players playing at a level that if he doesn't have to force it. If something's not working, or if something like I frankly love the idea that if you're not on time, does you don't get to play, right?
Mhm.
If there and if you take penalties that are damaging to your team, then you may not get out in the third period. And
Mhm.
I love a coach who does that, not for effect, right? I mean, some coaches do that. Some coaches are like, look at me, I can do this, I'm doing it. But Jim Hiller is definitely not that kind of guy. It's not his personality, but he's
No.
doing things that you have a message, you have to be consistent.
Hmm.
Your standard for your team has to be maintained. And if a standard's not being maintained, well, the option is, you get benched, or if you don't show up on time and you don't play that night. I think those are important messages.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to apply to everybody, especially with
Mhm.
the influx of a lot of these young players. You want to start off with a bad example and showing that there's, two justices on the team. I mean, yeah, so I
Yeah.
think it's good that he did that, and he did it for the right reason, I think, like he said. Um, yeah, so kind of, taking it to other teams in the league, you mentioned how the Preds are struggling, which on paper doesn't make sense because they loaded up on talent and but it's early. Do you, if we think about Ovechkin, do you think he's gonna break the record this season?
Yeah, and last year, if you asked that same question at the end, even though he had a better last third of the season, I thought it would have been hard. Um, and over the years, I spent a fair amount of time around that team, and I can say and came up in a conversation recently, but I once went bowling with Ovi. It was an absolutely zany night. He and all the Russian players went with it was a charity thing, and I've never seen a man throw a bowling ball like Ovechkin, except Fred Flintstone. He throws exactly like Fred Flintstone, but you know he's he just seems to be really having so much fun. And the Capitals are an interesting team to me. They're pretty different than Pittsburgh, and often we put them in the same category.
Hmm.
Going back to 04, 05, and after the lockout, and the Caps have brought in some young players, and they have sort of done that difficult retooling on the fly, but with keeping a mind to this is a record that no one thought would ever be broken. And we're going to be making, we're going to do what we can to help Alexander Ovechkin become the greatest goal scorer of all time. And he's off to such a great start, and he's playing with the big kid. I want to say Protus. I don't know if that's the pronunciation, but a kid who played in Hershey, and he seems to be a perfect fit. It just it's a great story. I love how Wayne Gretzky is all on board for it,
Hmm.
and it's going to be monumental, and I think he's going to do it. And the interesting part is that if he does, the chances are it's going to be late in the season. So let's call it, game 75 or whatever it is. And who knows, the Caps, last year they snuck into the playoffs. They've actually had a terrific start, but it's going to be meaningful, or it has the potential to be meaningful for the team as it relates to playoff positioning and getting in, and who knows, home ice advantage or whatever. and I can't think of anything better than having Ovechkin break Gretzky's record in games that mean something, as opposed to,
Yeah.
if
Hmm.
you're, because they're a team that is in transition. So it would be better if,
Hmm.
if it happens that way, at least if I'm writing that story, that would be better.
Yeah, I always forget that Gretzky, he's been kind of rooting him on for the last couple
I
of
know, I
years.
think
Me personally, I kind of always wanted Gretzky to have that record forever, being a Kings fan and everything.
Yep.
Um, and
same here. And I,
it seems incredible that it's even being threatened. It seemed even a
yeah.
couple of years ago, it seemed like, I don't know. That's still a lot of goals, but it
Hmm.
looks like it's going to happen. And I guess that what they say is true. Records are made to be broken. And even in baseball, with Willie Mays and well,
Yeah.
with Hank Aaron and everything, some of those records you thought would stand forever, they just don't.
Well, and I think, again, again, over the years, having spent time with Wayne Gretzky, and I know that Gordie Howe and the Howe family felt the same about Wayne Gretzky, and the record. And then I know the Howe family felt the same about Ovechkin, passing Gordie Howe. And I think, I mean, I believe it in their heart of hearts that they're okay with it, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I hate to, fall into the old cliche of, hockey players are selfless people, but I think in general, many of them are. And
Hmm.
I have no reason to not believe that Wayne Gretzky is fully on board for this. I
Yeah.
mean, he loves the game and he loves the chase, and he's encyclopedic about it all, right? Like he
Hmm.
knows
That's true.
all of it. And
Hmm.
I think he is, really chuffed to see what's going to
Hmm.
happen with Ovechkin. And, you know, game's a better place if that's how it happens, as opposed to, geez, I hope you retire before you get to my mark. But
That's exact. That would be kind of a bad mentality for sure. Um,
I think Ryan and I will be more upset than Wayne is.
Actually, I think I'm coming around, and I think I'll be I don't know about happy, but I mean he is just an elite goal scorer, so
Yeah, it's just
makes sense.
amazing.
He's done it so many years now, and it's just I mean it's only fitting, that
yeah,
Hmm.
and especially with Gretzky, the fact that a lot of his game was more just setting up goals. That's another thing that you can never take away from Gretzky is like in terms of assists and things. I mean, there were
yeah,
those years where like just his assists alone, I would have won
Yeah,
the
I don't.
scoring title. You
yes,
know,
exactly.
Yeah,
just those
I
crazy things from back then. But yeah, no, if Wayne's on board, that's good enough for me. But
Yeah.
so this might be kind of early for this question, but are the Winnipeg Jets for real this year?
Yeah, they've been so impressive to watch, and they're a real good team. It sort of reminds me a little bit of the Capitals, back in the day, where I'm not sure it matters what the Jets do for the rest of the season, right? I mean, yes, I thought they were a playoff team, maybe a bubble team after last year, but it's a team that consistently hasn't been able to elevate come playoff time. So
yeah,
it
exactly.
is a great story, and it's a great story. Although even now, I still see some of the reporting out of Winnipeg, and I can't remember the number. I think it was a Sunday game, and there were like 12,000 people there, and as we know, because last year the attendance became a storyline, and that's like that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And I'm not blaming Jets fans for not going. There've been some issues there, and so that's an issue for that franchise to repair its relationship with the fan base and get people back in that building. And it's there's a lot of factors that go into it, but certainly the team is doing everything it can, right? It wins every game. So, yeah, and it's impressive. It really is. They're an impressive team, but they are a team now that, and I think with good reason, none of this will matter if you get to April and you can't get out of the first round. All right. I mean, they moved to, I live in Atlanta. The summer of 11, the Thrashers go to Winnipeg. They've been to one conference final, um, and that's it. this is a team that needs to prove it in the playoffs. And while
Yeah.
it is a great story, and they may be, one of the great stories of the first month, um, I don't know that any of it matters until April. And
Yeah.
that's hard. It used to be the same thing with Washington, right?
Hmm.
Got all the 100-point guys and Mike Green and Nicholas. It didn't matter because invariably they would lose to Pittsburgh in the first or second round, and that became that became part of their DNA and their identity until it wasn't in 2018, and that's why that was so incredible. That has to happen for the Jets, in my mind, for any of this to be truly relevant.
Yeah, it's a head scratcher because last
Yeah.
year I was so convinced that they were going to have a deep run,
Mhm.
Totally
like
agree.
Western Conference Finals kind of run, or
Yes.
and I couldn't believe, when I watched that series, I just thought, this is not the same team because they have everything that you would think in theory they would need to go on a long deep run.
That series is so crazy. I mean, that the first game, I can't, was it, in fact, I remember watching it. We were in Edmonton, were we not, getting ready for game one or two or whatever it was in that first game. And, it was like 8-7 or whatever it turned out to be. And the Jets won that first game. And you're like, wow, that was kind of crazy. But, I was with you. I thought they would go to a West final. I thought they could have, they could have been a contender. But, they lose four straight games with the guy who wins the Vezina, and you're like, okay, like, I
Yeah.
don't know what you do. It's hard. And it's such a great, listen, it's such a great hockey town. It's such a great, you know, people, they deserve something there. They
Yeah.
deserve,
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember how excited how they, that whole city, they were just so excited when they came back,
yeah,
that first season. It was
Yeah.
just
yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember their series against Vegas, a few years ago, and I just remember thinking, oh, they're going to steamroll Vegas. They look so good, and they just didn't show up at all. Like it just they disappeared, and it's been that way for the last 5 or 6 years. Just wonder, like,
Yep.
what's the problem there?
2018. I know this because it comes up in a conversation with my friend Pierre Lebrun, and we were both the Athletic, and he was covering the West, and I was in the East. And he wrote after Winnipeg won first game one of the Western Conference Final, and his column was basically, "This series is over." I remember,
Yeah, that's
I
what it
remember
looked like.
like, and with the great part about it is that at various times, I know he does. I'm not telling tales out of school, but at various times, Marc-Andre Fleury's wife, I think, will occasionally text or reach out to Pierre and, remember when you said that series was over after, like, all in completely good nature, because no one is as nice as Marc-Andre Fleury or Marc-Andre Fleury's wife. But I do remember that. And I remember thinking, well, that's bold, but he's probably right. But anyway, to your point, like, what happened? I don't know.
I guess
Yeah.
that you like a journalist that takes a bold stand like that, but then, you might end up getting trolled about it for the next 6 years.
Yeah, no, it happens. So that's very true.
That's great. Tim, you have another question?
Well, bringing it back to the Kings, you talked about some of the new players they had. Fogel, I've been really impressed by him. And do you think this may be his best season? I know it's still early, but he's looking really good.
Yeah, and I met Warren a long time ago when he was in Carolina. It was nice to catch up with him in Quebec when I joined the team there, and he is such a he's so well liked. He's a guy that, just, I'm not surprised that he's fit in as well as he has, because I think that is his nature. But he has excellent speed. His shot is deceptively strong. Like, he does have the tools. And again, it's sort of, do you find the right fit? And then it's the consistency, for a player, who's been on a couple of teams, and maybe, it's been a challenge to get the opportunities to play some power play time or play in the top six or the top nine, or, all those things that, people say, well, how come you didn't score any points? Well, if you're playing, 8 minutes a night and you're not ever playing on the power play, those are contributing factors. And if Warren continues to, you know, get some opportunities, he plays with good players. That's the good thing about this Kings depth, as we talked about earlier. Um, there are good players to play with. And if you continue to take advantage of that, again, you think about confidence and all those kinds of things. It is, man, it's a marathon though, and
Yeah.
we're 70 games out. So, but I think it has to be really encouraging, for the organization. Um, when you look at, okay, you're bringing people in, what's the fit? Who's going to do what, where? Um, I think what has happened is that you have a lot of players that Jim Hiller and his staff, can manipulate and plug and play, do different things. Not all teams have that. And
Yeah.
if you don't have players who have the skill set to move up and down and to do different things, Warren Fogel's been a really important part of this penalty kill early on, I think. And I think again, players get confidence from being given those roles or opportunities. So I don't know. He's such a good guy. And yeah, it's a good story. It's a good story. And if he gets to that, I don't know, what's the number? If he scores 25 goals, boy, I think wouldn't that be, I think that would be pretty good. I think if he got
I
there.
I'd love it.
Yeah, that
So
would be huge.
Yeah.
yeah. So, but I don't think that's out, it's not, we're not pulling a name and saying,
No,
well, I
yeah.
think he could score 43. Well, I don't know. Maybe not, but anyway, it's interesting to see early on, to see some of these guys who really are thriving early on, and Fogel's one of them.
He's fit right in, and yeah, I really like his game.
Yeah.
So how are we feeling about this tandem of Darcy Kemper and Big Save Dave Riddick? Is it sustainable? I mean, because that was one of the question marks coming into the season, was the goaltending with the Kings.
Yeah. Well, and you go back to last year and you think about Max Talbot and what a terrific run he had, early on. And um I think, I talked to Darcy Kemper during training camp, and I had written about him a number of years ago, after he'd been with the Kings very briefly, but he had really rediscovered his game, had really was very candid. Was not, he lacked confidence when he came to LA. He, didn't know what his career was going to be like or how it was going to proceed. And Bill Ranford really, yeah, not to be hyperbolic, but I think it's fair to say he helped save Darcy Kemper's career. And he went on to become a very valuable starter, obviously won a Stanley Cup. The fact that he's back in LA, a place where he feels very comfortable, even though Bill Ranford's in a different role now. I think he's been excellent. And I like the idea that, Dave Rittich is, to me, he is a guy that, you don't want probably to overextend him. But in the moments where he's had the opportunity, Darcy was hurt for a bit, he really answered the bell. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure you could ask for anything else, right, from your goaltenders, and you want them to push each other, and you want, again, going back to Jim Hiller's, you know, coaching style. Like Dave Rittich keeps playing well, he's going to keep getting opportunities to
Mhm.
play, and I think
Mhm.
that's what you want. And if it ends up at the end of the year that the two are closer to 50-50 than you might have imagined, that's probably, again, glass half full. Maybe that's not a bad thing because it means Dave Rittich has earned maybe more starts than you imagined he would. I do like where Darcy Kumper's game has been at, the odd wobble, that game against Ottawa,
Mhm.
that
Mm,
what happened in that game, I do not know. But
yeah.
I think for the most part, go back to the, game one against Buffalo, right? That's a game there's no way the Kings should have won.
Not at
Instead, you
all.
end up with
Mm,
2 points, you move on. So I think, and again, I think Darcy Kumper is, he's in a place where he wants to be, and I think that's really important, especially for goaltenders.
Well, that's great news for Kings fans everywhere.
For sure.
Any other questions, Tim?
How do you think the Kings are gonna do against Vancouver tonight? Struggled with Vancouver sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
I think Vancouver maybe's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start. Maybe, you know, what are you thinking?
Um, yeah, I think didn't they weren't they like 3-0-1 or something last year? Or, I thought the Kings were hoping to play Vancouver in the first round. That was the that was the preferred destination. But you know what I like the Kings at home. Again, you play so few home games. I think there's still, you know, my sense of it would be that there's still a real buzz at being at home after, you know, having played 10 road games already. Playing at home, there, you know, there should be a real juice in the arena, and it should be it should be a good vibe. And you know, it's a Canucks team. I know there's a lot, you know, questions about Elias Pettersson. Where is his game at? And what, you know, the expectations again so high for that player, one of the, you know, one of the smartest, most skilled players in the game. And Vancouver's a hard market. Like, you got to bring it all the time, and if you don't, you hear about it. It's a hard
Mhm.
market, and you know, no Thatcher Demko yet in goal. So you know, to me, this is a good opportunity for the Kings to take advantage. So I will say that I think it's a good opportunity for them to take advantage
Yeah,
at home.
I hope they can, yes.
Do we know how close Thatcher Demko is to coming back? Because I think I saw him. I think he was skating yesterday.
Yeah, and I think I think there have been appearances. I don't know that he's been. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't know that it's. My sense is I'm not sure it's imminent. I don't. It seems to have been quite a mystery, right? I mean, it,
Hmm.
you know, disappeared very early in that series against Nashville last year. I think it was early in the first game, if I'm not mistaken. But sometime in that first game, you know, looked like he might be able to come back. And then it was seemed to be fairly late in the summer that it was, oh, by the way,
Hmm.
we're not, I don't, this isn't going to happen at the start of the season. So, you know, it's troubling. Listen, it's a really good team. You know, Rick Tocchet, I've known Rick a long time, have all the time in the world for him. And I think he's a really, really good coach. So, you know, whatever happens tonight, it won't be easy. That's for sure.
No.
Yeah, it's good. It'll help us answer that question, what are
Yeah.
the Kings so far? Because
Mm,
but like it's great that you meant let every mention that so many of those games were on the road. I think sometimes we forget about that and we kind of look at the competition. They kind of the strength of schedule. They except for Toronto and the games with Vegas,
Yeah.
they kind of played some weaker opponents. But on the other hand, you could say, well, yeah, but those are all on the road,
mhm.
so
Yeah, it is. I mean, it
it
is
kind of
valid.
works
It's
itself
fair.
out.
Yeah, no, it truly it does. And you're right. You know, you want to show well against good teams. I got to tell you, you know, that win over Minnesota, and you know, I've done some content for the Wild over the last couple of years. Um, you know, and the way they got off to this, you know, their start to this season was so impressive. And John Hines is a really good coach, and it's, you know, Kirill Kaprizov is, you know, I see a lot of people saying he could win the Hart Trophy. So that's a real good team, and I thought, you know, again, second of back to backs, that was pretty impressive performance. And so
Yeah.
again, yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, you play this, the schedule is the schedule. You play it, okay. Um, you know, but the fact is, you have already put 10 road games in the pocket, and you're tied for first place in the Pacific. And I think that's pretty good.
No, it is. And they just kind of need to build off that and kind of, put some home wins in the bank. There were times where I think even last year when they had that incredible win streak on the road,
Yeah,
and then
Mhm.
they had a long and then they kind of followed up, I think it was their longest homestand with just a real kind of so-so homestand.
yeah,
And I remember I thought, man, that I'm really throwing away some points, you
yeah.
know.
Well, and that's, yeah, you're absolutely right, right? I mean, you have a good road record. If you don't follow it up with a good home record, then it's like you squandered it. So yeah, that's, I tell you, the NHL schedule is relentless, and
Mhm.
teams that exhale or teams that,
Yeah.
you know, think they've accomplished something, are often abruptly reminded that they haven't. And, again, that's a challenge, because it is such a young team, right? When you take Drew out of that lineup and I know, Trevor Lewis, and how nice for him get a couple goals the other night. I mean,
Awesome.
really, really nice. And with Anjay but there are a lot of young kids in that lineup who are being asked to do a lot. And to me, that's the real challenge for the coaching staff too. You have this success. Okay, you can't be you can't be looking at the standings. You can't be looking at your stats. Can't be, you know, you can't exhale. You can't. And
Mhm.
that's a challenge, I think, for a coaching staff and saying, we have done nothing yet.
Yeah.
And don't ever forget that. So
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you're like a week or 10 days away from, it can be the difference between making the playoffs or not, or making the
yeah.
playoffs. You have,
Mm.
a lull at the wrong time of the season and that can be it. So
Yeah.
Sure.
that is great. It's been great talking to you, Scott. Do you have
Yeah, it's been
do you
awesome.
want to tell people where they can follow your work?
Yeah, sure. There's a newsletter, Burnside on Hockey. You can find me at Overtime Scott B on X/Twitter. I am, pretty, periodically but on a regular basis, with the helping out Zach Dooley, who does an unbelievable job and doing stuff for the Kings and some podcasts and a little bit of everything. And so that's connected to the Kings and will be periodically throughout the season. So that's kind of fun. And as I mentioned, coming back to LA for a little bit to, do some stuff in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, it's
That's great.
that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, speaking of a relentless schedule, yeah, the LA Kings Insider, it always blows my mind all the content
Yeah.
that Zach Dooley puts out on a daily basis. It's
Hmm.
yeah, a couple of stick taps to him
He
because
is
it's
he is a veritable machine, and he's great to work with.
and
So
the same for his predecessors like John Rosen and
yes,
it's just they're just eating Kings hockey and just sleeping Kings hockey
Hmm.
24/7 and it shows in what they produce. It's great.
yeah,
Any final thoughts, Tim?
No, that was great conversation.
yeah.
I agree. So we'll just close out how we always do. Go Kings,
Go
go.
Kings, go.